Olympic City and the home of Pikes Peak. This is the Automotive ADHD Show with Matt West.
And here we are, rocking it on the Automotive ADHD Show, heard on the radio here in Southern Colorado, around the world as a podcast. Matt West here, hanging out with you, talking cars on the weekend. I got a loaded show for you today. After many years, Dodge finally kills the Charger. Well, actually, there's this new electric thing they're calling a Charger, but I don't believe them. So we're going to give you all of the details on that. Also, NASCAR has penalized a driver because he wore the wrong type of glove. It's a little interesting. There's an interesting story behind this, and I talk about why I think NASCAR has maybe gone off the deep end. Or, well, they've been off the deep end, and they've fallen off of the deep end again, which is possible if you're NASCAR. And also in the third half of the show, really excited, I've got an interview all about air conditioning. I promise you, this is exciting. There is a big change coming to the industry that may affect all of us who want to cruise around in comfort. So I'm going to talk to Natalie Dixon. She is from a company called Chemours, who is the predominant manufacturer of the refrigerant used in your very car. So we're going to talk about that and more. We're also going to play your car sounds on this edition of the show. Now, of course, I want to welcome you if you're joining me on a new time on AM 1460 and FM 101.1, The Answer, 9 a.m. Saturdays now. And we're also right now on the sister station for AM 1460, The Answer. We're on 100.7 The Word. I want to welcome you if you're joining me on this new time and you haven't heard this show before. This is a show all about cars. I am a resident car guy here at the radio station. And of course, you can also catch this show on several other radio stations around the state as well. Regardless of where you are, we're on a number of great stations from 1400 KRLN to 91.7 KLZR. And of course, here in Colorado Springs, there is Car Talk in the mountains, you could say. And so welcome to have you joining me here on the air. If you're joining me at the new time and new place, thank you. Thank you for being here. And we've got a lot of stuff to talk about, though. So now, one thing before I talk about the new Charger, this is interesting. Reagan National Airport had 7,000 noise complaints in 1 year. And why am I talking about this on a car show? You'll see why in a little bit. But the airport, 7,000 noise complaints. I get this. If you live by an airport, or if you are an airport, I should say. I mean, not you specifically. Like, you physically aren't an airport. But if you are an airport, this is for all those airports out there, you probably do get noise complaints, right? You got jets flying overhead, propeller planes, all this noise, all this commotion at all hours of the day, especially Reagan Airport, which I've flown into a number of times for work, among other things. I've been to through the Reagan Airport several times. And yeah, being around an airport is loud, evidenced by the fact that everyone walking outside on the flight line is wearing ear protection. And but here's the interesting thing. I said 7,000 noise complaints in 1 year. You're probably thinking, gosh, that's 7,000 people who thought the sound of the planes was annoying. Well, as it turns out, one household made up 78% of the noise complaints against the airport. One household, one person has lodged that many noise complaints, which is just an insane statistic there. And look, this ties into cars. Trust me, this does. But this is one of those things that is very, I mean, look, we all got to be good neighbors with each other, right? We do. And being a good neighbor, especially if you're a guy like me who likes to work on his car in the driveway and maybe has a few cars parked around the house, I mean, you got to step it up and you got to be a good neighbor. Otherwise, I mean, people are going to kind of get fed up with things. So, that's a consideration when you're a car guy. I've had previously and places I've lived, and I've had HOAs. Now, thankfully, I'm fortunate enough that I don't live in a place with an HOA right now, a homeowners association. But previously, I've had my cars called things like eyesores and something that devalues the neighborhood. I've had that happen to me before. And now, I don't know if I'm speaking to people who've quite been there in the same way. I'm sure if you listen to this show regularly, if you listen to the podcast of this show, maybe that's happened to you as well. But, I'm at a point where it's like, okay, yes, I've got these project cars, but I'm trying to be a good person about it. I'm trying to do it in a way that doesn't annoy my neighbors, right? That's the last thing I want. I want to be a good neighbor, and I want to be a good steward of the car community in that sense, because if the neighbors go, gosh, this guy's wrenching on cars all the time, he's starting loud cars at 2 a.m, this dude is not pleasant to be around, right? I don't want that to be the case, because people get the wrong idea about car enthusiasts, right? And we as a car enthusiast, we want folks to, not think too terribly, at least, of us. But that being said, how this ties into the airports, right? One single resident, 78%. Here, can I do the math here? Probably not in my head. I'm not going to do it, but I'm going to do it on the calculator here. But 78% of that, 78. So let's see, 7,000. That's 5,400 complaints that this one person did. Can you imagine that? Now, here's the thing, right? I do have an opinion on this because this ties into racetracks and, among other things, racetracks getting closed down. But, look, you move next to an airport, right? So Reagan International Airport, or Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport is technically what it's called, has been around for quite a long time. They've been around, I want to say, don't quote me on it, but since the 1940s, or here we go, 1941 is when it first opened up. So there is a good possibility the person who filed all 5,400 of these complaints hasn't been living there since before 1941. So the idea then is that you moved into a location with an airport, knowing that there was an airport there. You willingly bought the house next to an airport, and then maybe they were just really bored and they wanted to make some headlines. But then you go and you make over 5,000 noise complaints against that airport for being too noisy, which it's like, part of me says, yes, it would, I don't live next to an airport, and it would probably be kind of annoying to live next to an airport as busy as Reagan Airport there. That would probably be kind of frustrating, right? So I wouldn't buy a house next to the airport. Now, then again, if I was working in D.C. all the time and I was commuting and back and forth and I wanted a house right next to the airport, knowing it would be noisy, but for the convenience, have a 5-minute drive to the airport, get on a plane and go do business, right? But that being the case, this ties into cars because we've had a number of racetracks across the country, even some here in Colorado. I mean, Bandimere comes to mind. Bandimere Raceway, Speedway up in, just past Denver there. And Bandimere has been around for a very long time. And, it used to be way back in the day that it kind of was out of town. Well, now the housing developments and now everything has encroached Bandimere and has gone around it. And undoubtedly people have complained about the noise of the racetrack. But here's the thing, the racetrack was there first, and we see this too. Famous YouTuber, Cletus McFarlane, he has a racetrack that he bought, and he calls it the Freedom Factory. Well, it was out in the middle of nowhere, essentially, and a housing development came along and bought all the land around the perimeter of his racetrack, and is now seeking to close down his racetrack for being too noisy. And he's had some legal battles with this, and he's had some wins, and they've come to an agreement as of now. But again, I mean, that an agreement as of now doesn't mean that the next, homeowners association or whoever comes along doesn't seek to dissolve the contract that they've got now, right? So, I mean, this ties into one of those things that I think if you want to live next to a racetrack, which could be a selling point, by the way, if you're a guy like me who likes to go to the racetrack, I would love to live next to a racetrack. In fact, the noise wouldn't bother me at all. Not at all. Yeah, maybe an airport would be a little tiring, but a racetrack, those are noises I want to hear. And, I think you could turn this in an interesting way. If you were a housing development and you bought some land next to a racetrack, you could turn that housing development into a racers housing development. Like a lot of guys who've got track cars have money, some of the nicer track cars, I should say. Don't look at me for having a lot of money and or nice cars, because I don't. But a lot of guys who have a race car and a trailer, maybe a couple of race cars, maybe they compete competitively, would love the idea of buying a house with a nice big furnished garage in there right next to a racetrack. And that would actually be a selling point to people like that. So there is a good way, a good solution to this. And I think, if you want to live next to an airport, go for it. Live next to an airport. If you want to live next to a racetrack, go for it. But Come on, don't complain at the airport, or in this case, to make my point, the racetrack about it. So, hey, there you go. Hey, don't go anywhere. We're going to be back with more Automotive ADHD. We're talking the new Charger after the break.
And now for how things work with an engineer.
Rotary engines. Regret.
And that was how things work with an engineer. More of how things work can be found at facebook.com/automotive ADHD.
And we are back for another segment here on the Automotive ADHD show. Hey, remember to send those car sounds into the show. I play listener-submitted car sounds on the Facebook page, and I play those. You can send them to the Facebook page, I should say, facebook.com/automotive ADHD. You can also email me, matt@throttlewarrior.com, for your chance to have your car sounds featured on the show. When you do that, you are also eligible to win some cool stuff. Everything from the Automotive ADHD key tag to the Automotive ADHD as heard on the Automotive ADHD sticker. If you're watching on video, it's on the back of my laptop. And of course, a chance to also win a $25 parts store gift certificate. So send those car sounds into the show for your chance to do all of that. And of course, have it here on the radio. I want to thank everyone who has sent in those car sounds in the past. So I want to talk about this for a moment here. Before we harp on NASCAR and things like that, the new Charger, the new Dodge Charger, I talked about it at the top of the show. We saw the concept of this come out a few months back, and it looked interesting. It did. It absolutely did. It's got it retains the striking lines and the look of the original Charger, but it's a little different, and we knew that. We knew Dodge was going to do an electric one. That's okay. That's fine. We knew all of that was going to happen. And as far as the looks of the new Charger, so Dodge has officially now unveiled the new Charger. They've been teasing us for months and months on it. And the Charger, is a very popular car. Lots of people love the Chargers, even the current generation ones, all the way back to the old school Chargers. Even the weird Shelby Charger things in the 1980s that were built on K cars. There's like a weirdly devoted group of people who like those. So, but that being the case, the Charger's been around for a long time. It's got a long history. It's a classic muscle car. Great lines. For most of its life, great sounding V8s too. But that has come to an end because the Charger is no longer going to be sold with a V8. This new Charger with these new body lines, all brand new from the ground up, does not have a V8. And in its place, you have two options: a 670 horsepower Scat Pack electric car, okay, or you can have a 550 horsepower straight six. So we knew about the straight six. If you've listened to my show before, we've talked about the straight six, the Hurricane straight six that Dodge has been using, or rather Stellantis, Dodge, Fiat, Chrysler, Jeep, Ram, all of that. They've been using this straight six platform in a number of vehicles. And, I don't dislike straight sixes. I like them quite a bit, actually. I've got a Jeep Wrangler with the was formerly a 4-liter straight six, now stroked out to 4.6 liters with a hot cam and some other things. But I like straight sixes. They're good engines. They make great torque. I don't dislike that you can get the Charger with a turbo straight six. People have to realize that some of the most sought-after cars of the past 30 years now have had straight sixes. You look at the Toyota Supra, the 4th-generation Supra. You look at the Skyline, the GTRs, whether it's the R32, 33, or 34. You look at all of those, and yes, there has been a straight six in those. As car enthusiasts, we've grown to love them. BMW is renowned for their straight sixes. Hence why for the 5th-gen Supra, Toyota sought BMW's help in developing a straight six platform car. And yes, it is just a BMW with some Toyota badges, but that's okay. That's okay. That's fine. But here's the problem with the Charger, which is that it's a V8 pony car. It's a pony car, right? It's a muscle car, and you got to have a V8 in a muscle car. You just have to. Yes, there's a turbo straight six option if you want that. There are things you would want a turbo straight six for. Weight savings, compared to a V8, maybe being one of them. Maybe the smooth power delivery, maybe the torque band. Maybe you want a straight six, but a lot of people also want a V8. And I talked about this on the show a little bit ago, back in January, how Ford, Jim Farley, CEO of Ford, has said, we are keeping the straight six. We are keeping the V8 around for the indefinite future, probably as long as Farley is in the commanding chair of the company, right? As long as he is in the captain's chair, he's saying we're going to have a V8 in one way or another, whether it's a hybrid V8 or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's going to be a V8. And they know that. And they know that Dodge is not committed to that same thing. Now, I've said in the past, though, Dodge has very famously done the classic rock band technique, as I like to call it, saying we're doing the last thing. This is the last of this, the last tour, whatever. And then they come back and do a reunion tour and all of that. You've heard me use that analogy several times. And maybe that's what they're doing. They're probably going to release this straight six version here with the EV version. Yes, the EV version is going to make some ponies, right? Are they ponies? Are they electric? What are they? Are they lightning bolts? I don't know. I really don't know. But 670 horsepower out of an electric car is fun. It's fast. It's going to be all-wheel drive most likely. Yeah, it's going to have the stupid noise generator that everyone lambasted Dodge for it when they unveiled the concept version of the car with the fake engine noises. No one wants fake engine noises. If you're going to give me an EV charger, that's fine. It needs to make EV noises, which, by the way, is really nothing. Maybe a light whine or a light hum. That's it, right? I want a genuine car, especially people who buy performance cars, buy enthusiast cars, more so than people who just want something that's going to be efficient and nice to drive to work and back. People who buy performance cars want that. They want that genuineness. Dodge thinks they want to they think their owners want fake EV noises, which, if anything, on social media was, if we're going off of that, when they did the concept car of this, if we're going off of that, then, it's one of those things that everyone was kind of frustrated with that. But that being the case, Dodge has finally given us the new Charger. I think they will probably gauge the market on the with the straight six option, which, again, straight sixes are good engines. They're not V8s, though. In this segment, you need a V8. You need it in some way, shape, or form. And they'll probably, go a year or two, and then they'll bring it back, and there'll be all this fanfare and all this hype of, we brought back the V8. Or we've done an electric hybrid boost V8, which would be even cooler. Best of both worlds. That instant torque from those electric motors, the efficiency from the electric motors, plus the roar of the V8 and the top end the top end speed, the top end horsepower out of a aspirated engine that you oftentimes don't achieve with electric cars. That being said, top speed of the electric one, they're calling it the Daytona, harking back to the former years of the the Charger Daytona, NASCAR. We're going to talk about NASCAR here. So, you know what? It's also heavy too. The electric version, they're saying 5,835 pounds. That's pretty heavy. Electric cars, you got to realize, are heavy. They are heavy. They're always going to be heavy. So anyway, there you go. That is the new Charger, which I don't know if I'm necessarily a fan of it or not. And we'll see here where they do it. I would love to get my hands on one and go from there on it. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts on the new Charger. And you can chime in on that on the Facebook page, facebook.com/automotive ADHD. Go check that out. Let me know your thoughts on it. Do you say, I don't care about the V8. I don't care about that. It's fine. Cool. Let me know those thoughts. We'll share them here on the show, and we'll go from there on that. So I got to talk a little bit here, though, about NASCAR in the last couple minutes of this, and we'll touch more on the Charger. So. And we'll go from there on that. So NASCAR has done something a little unusual when it comes to rules, which you might be saying, well, NASCAR and rules. Oh boy, NASCAR and rules. Okay, so NASCAR has taken a stance on gloves. On gloves, okay? You might be saying, how does a glove matter? And this involves NASCAR driver Joey Logano. Joey Logano was doing quite well, qualifying on pole, by the way, for a number of things. And then there was some debacle. There was some mystery because somebody said, well, hey, he's wearing a glove that looks weird on his left hand. So one thing, by the way, with NASCAR, you got to realize is that the driver's side window, it's got a net over it, but it's effectively open, and that plays into the aerodynamics of the car. And what does that mean for somebody wearing a glove? Well, he was wearing a webbed glove. He had the hand, right? You had the fingers, and then he had fabric between the fingers of the glove, kind of like a duck's foot. And maybe that's a weird analogy, but he was holding his hand by the window with this webbed glove. And drivers will hold their hand by the window to try to deflect some of the air and improve the aerodynamics of the car. But he was doing that with this webbed glove. And I think that this was interesting. It was an interesting workaround, not necessarily something entirely illegal in NASCAR, though technically speaking, NASCAR rules do say that gloves shall have separate sections for each finger and thumb. And obviously his were connected with fabric, but they still had the separate, individual fingers on the glove. So, right, this is one of those things that racing is always been who can bend the rules the most while sort of staying in the rules. And that's just how it goes. And to anyone's knowledge, no one had competed with a webbed glove. Again, you might, it's the driver's glove. How does that matter? How does that make a difference? Well, NASCAR said, well, okay, we can see how you interpreted the rules one way. We interpret the rules another way. Anyway, we're still going to penalize you and make you go to the back of the line for qualifying. And it really caused quite the penalty, which I think is not in the spirit of racing. I think it's not. I'm going to come out and weirdly defend Joey Logano, though most people are calling him a cheater over this. But the fact is, you look at the greats in racing, and if it's not stated exactly in the rule book, then it's open to interpretation. That's how racing has been. And in fact, I think that's kind of what keeps teams on their toes. So if he has this weird glove for aerodynamic purposes, because remember, these cars are doing like 200 miles an hour, right? The aerodynamics at that speed are relevant. If he has that, then, well, all right. And if that's within the rules, then everyone else is going to say, okay, well, hey, let's all start doing web gloves and let's do this and that. And you're going to get other teams. It's not an unfair cheat when the other teams, it's something the other teams could easily do themselves in a pinch, in a way. And I think that racing should have this spontaneity to it. Yes, you need to have class and you need to have certain ground rules, right, that keep the playing field fair. But when there's something that's between the lines, it's not quite in the rules. You can interpret it one way or another. That's where you get some of the most interesting innovation in racing, which has all been dead in NASCAR for years and years. And it just, you don't get these famous things like the famous fan car. There's other instances, a Smokey Eunuch. I mean, there are ways that this could really, I don't know, in a weird way, maybe improve the racing. And it was one of those things that, all right, they said, well, we penalized him because it wasn't in the spirit of the rule, even though you could kind of read between the lines and say it still qualified within the rule. But I mean, at the very point, NASCAR say, oh, all right, well, we want to rewrite that rule. No one else can do it now, instead of penalizing the guy who figured it out. I don't know. I think NASCAR needs to be more interesting, and having weird stuff like this could make it more interesting. So anyway, that's all I got time for on that. Don't go anywhere. We're talking AC next, right here after the break.
Colorado Springs' #1 car show by default. This is Automotive ADHD.
And here we are, rocking it on the third half of the Automotive ADHD show, and I'm really excited to welcome a guest onto the show. But before that, we're wrapping up winter here in Colorado, so you're probably not thinking about the AC on your car, at least right now, but you should be, especially because the warm weather is just a few short months away, and you really don't want to wait until it's too late. Trust me on that. So if you're a mechanic or a DIYer, there are some big changes happening in the automotive AC industry that might just be the difference between you cruising around in comfort or not. And my guest joining me here is currently the marketing manager at Chemours, Natalie Dixon. Welcome to Automotive ADHD.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Now, Natalie, before we talk about Chemours and what my listeners need to know about some of the changes happening in the industry, give me some quick insight into a little bit of your background as well as the company's background. I think the company makes some things that perhaps my audience doesn't know directly, but I guarantee they have interacted with it in one way or another, maybe just without realizing it.
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. So Chemours is a chemical company that wants to create a better world through the power of our chemistry. We have a world-class product portfolio where we provide solutions for many industries, including automotive, advanced electronics, and construction. And when you think about the number of industries we support, it really demonstrates that Chemours chemistry is a vital part of our everyday lives. And with that, it's our responsibility to ensure that we are enabling technologies and innovations that are more environmentally friendly, including the development of sustainable refrigerant solutions. So for me, I'm just excited to be a part of the company and the team that is developing solutions for the automotive industry. I've been with Chemours for 10 years and filled several roles that gave me a strong technical foundation. But perhaps more importantly, I discovered a passion I have for helping the industry embrace the next generation refrigerant that is zero ozone depleting and has significantly lower global warming potential. So in my role as the America's Marketing Manager for Automotive, I have the privilege to support the automotive aftermarket and heavy duty and off-highway vehicle markets with their technology transition to 1234yf solutions in ways that support both business growth and a more sustainable planet.
Awesome. And speaking of that 1234yf, that's one of the changes. That's one of the things that's going on. But before we talk a little bit about that, a lot of my listeners are guys like me. They're DIYers, but I also have listeners who are techs and mechanics. Some of them run their own businesses. So this involves all of us in one way or another, and maybe even more so if you are a technician or a independent mechanic. But now, before we talk about the 1234yf and some of the things going on, give me a quick rundown of the history, if you will, of automotive refrigerants. We've made changes before, and listeners who've been around cars for a long time might go, well, didn't we just change to a different type of refrigerant recently? What is the rundown on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So for all your listeners that are history buffs, they're going to enjoy this walk back in time and talk about the history of automotive refrigeration. So R12 was the first safe, non-toxic refrigerant used in the automotive industry. And it was used until the 90s when it was banned by the government under the Montreal Protocol due to its high ozone depletion potential, or ODP, and was ultimately replaced with 134A, which is a hydrofluorocarbon refrigerant, or HFC. So at that time, 134A was the perfect solution because its ODP was zero. And so cars produced in the early 90s contained 134A in their air conditioning systems. But while 134A solved the ozone depletion concerns, years later it was determined that it had a high global warming potential, or GWP. So in 2016, the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol was adopted as an international agreement to phase down the production and consumption of HFCs by 85% by 2047 due to their high GWP. So this includes 134A MAP. So that really brings us to where we are today, where these regulations and an unwavering commitment to manufacturing sustainably, we are at work to phase out 134A and replace it with a very low GWP and environmentally friendly next generation refrigerant, which is 1234yf. Chemours is deeply embedded in the history of refrigerants. And as a company, we are investing in the world's largest 1234yf production facility, which just demonstrates our commitment to supporting this monumental transition towards building a more sustainable automotive industry.
Well, and that speaks to the fact that, I mean, if you've got a car with air conditioning, there's a good chance that Chemours is the company that made the refrigerant in your air conditioning, right? Like I said, a lot of times it's not a product that my listeners maybe directly interact with every day, but it's something that is kind of, it's there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's correct. Yep.
And so let's talk a little bit about that transition to 1234yf, and let's talk about what does that mean for business owners, for mechanics, particularly who are going to be working on these vehicles. What does it mean for manufacturers? What's the big picture view, at least in the automotive sense, of what this transition means for individuals? Absolutely.
Well, it's important for shop owners, mechanics, and DIYers to be informed of the regulatory drivers and the impact that this will have on the automotive aftermarket. So as I mentioned, in 2016, an international regulation was adopted to phase down the production and consumption of HFCs. Specifically in the U.S., the EPA enacted the AIM Act in 2020 to address the phase down of HFCs and facilitate the transition to next generation technologies through sector-based restrictions. So what does that mean for your listeners then, Matt? Well, since the mid-2010s, car manufacturers such as Ford, Hyundai, Toyota, BMW have switched to using YF for first fill manufacturing in all of their makes and models. And so today, more than 95% of vehicles manufactured for sales in the U.S. contain 1234YF, which means that there are roughly 95 million vehicles on the road charged with YF today. So if you consider that number, and if you consider that roughly 15 million vehicles come out of warranty annually, this means that about 30% of the fleet size coming into shops will be containing 1234YF this year. So, Matt, it's incredibly important that shop owners understand this number so that they can prepare for servicing YF charged vehicles and keep business in their shop and potentially pick up business from other local shops that can't service them. So there is a need today to service YF vehicles, and the service needs will continue to grow exponentially. So those who are ahead of the game and prepared for servicing YF vehicles will be the ones who benefit the most.
Yeah, and you know, it pays to stay ahead of the game on things with stuff like this. It absolutely does. And now I want to talk a little bit about what does it mean to be ready for YF? What do, you know, if you're a small business owner listening right now, what sort of changes could you expect? If you don't service YF right now, what would you need to do to be able to service YF vehicles in terms of equipment, in terms of supply, in terms of obviously, you know, Chemours supplies the refrigerant as well. What does that look like for a small business owner?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing that I just want to mention here is that it's illegal and poses a safety risk to mix 1234YF and 134A. You absolutely cannot service one vehicle with the other. Really? So you have to be prepared. Wow. Yeah. So you can determine if the car has been charged with 1234YF by inspecting the SAE sticker that's located underneath the hood of the vehicle. And if that's not there, then you can reference the vehicle owner's manual. But kind of coming back to your question, Matt, the good news is for the aftermarket, 10 and 25 pound Opteon YF cylinders are available for service shops. And we also have 12, 14, and 18 ounce small cans available for DIYers or service shops who just aren't ready to invest in the necessary YF equipment like a triple R machine, leak detectors, and refrigerant identifiers. So on that note, I should mention that the service equipment, it does work pretty much the same as the old 134A equipment. However, everything does need to be compatible with YF, and that's because the cylinder threading is reversed, so there's no possibility for cross-contamination. So it does require some upfront investment, Matt.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then finally, I do want to just quickly note that because of commitments like companies like Chemours, your listeners can be confident in YF availability. The supply chain is robust, and we are ready to meet the growing demand.
And that's good news to hear. Now, Natalie Dixon, my guest. Natalie, hang with me for just a second. We're going to take a quick break here. On the other side of the break, we're going to talk about a few more things that you need to know if you own a car, or especially if you're a small business owner or a mechanic. We're going to get to all of that and more right here on Automotive ADHD. Don't go anywhere. And we're back on the Automotive ADHD show, heard around Southern Colorado on several great radio stations, as well as a podcast. Anywhere fine shows and mine are downloaded online. My guest is Natalie Dixon from Chemours, who is a company that makes some things that I guarantee are in your car. And we're talking about automotive refrigerant, specifically your AC. Again, I know that we're here in Colorado, at least, we're still having some of that colder weather, but you don't want to make the classic project car mistake, which is, well, I'll fix the AC later, which it's going to be, you know, it's not going to be good for you because it's going to be the middle of June and you're going, man, I wish I fixed that AC. So, and this goes for even if you don't have a project car, if you've got a current vehicles, this especially applies to, because we're talking about 1234YF, which is a new type of refrigerant that is in many, many modern production cars, but a lot of shops and independents at the moment, at least, aren't up to speed on servicing these systems. Your dealership may be, but Natalie, so tell me a little bit. The 1234YF, the change here was spurred on predominantly, and you mentioned this briefly in the last segment, but it was spurred on by the AIM Act. What is the 10,000-foot view of the AIM Act? What is it in general? Can you explain that?
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. So if we take a step back, right, as I mentioned in 2016, the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol was adopted as an international agreement to phase down the production and consumption of HFCs by 85% by 2047 due to their high GWP. So that includes 134A. Mm-hmm. So the AIM Act, so this is specific to the U.S., where the EPA had enacted the AIM Act in 2020 to address the phase down of HFCs and to facilitate the transition to next generation technologies through sector-based restrictions. So again, Matt, that includes 134A in automobiles.
Right. And so you mentioned this too, but I think it's really important for us to stress on this, which is that you can't mix these systems at all, right? You can't come along and take, YF and put it into a 134A system whatsoever. And you said it may even be illegal to do that. Is that correct?
Absolutely. It is illegal. And like I said, Matt, it poses safety risks if you mix 134A with YF.
Right. And so the key point here is if you're a grassroots guy or if you're a independent technician, right, there shouldn't be any trying to force the YF system onto an old 134 system. That is something that we should steer clear of. Now, Natalie, one final thing too, which is what does this mean for folks, perhaps with older cars and classics? I mean, obviously the YF conversion is more relevant for people with current production vehicles right now that are going to need an AC service at some point in their lifetime. But what does this change, if anything, for classics?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Matt. And really, that's probably a key trend that we're seeing in the aftermarket today. Like you said, we need to make sure that service shops and mechanics are ready to support YF. But at the same time, they will also need to continue to service cars with 134A. So no worries to your classic car owners out there. There are efforts underway within the industry regarding recycling and reclamation of 134A. So. Fantastic. And then the service will continue.
Well, that's good. That's good, because I know a lot of guys are like, uh-oh, we're switching to something new again, and maybe I can't get what I need. And that's always a concern when you've got a classic car, an older vehicle like that.
Absolutely.
And guys like me, we spend our time trying to keep these things on the road. So, knowing that things like that are going to be fine for now. They're going to work out for now with that. And of course, if you're servicing new vehicles, this is especially relevant. The YF conversion is especially relevant. So, Natalie, thank you so much for joining me here on the Automotive ADHD show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
All right. Awesome. Great having Natalie on the show. Now, I got just a few more minutes here, and I want to get to this. We've talked before about buttons in cars, like physical buttons, not touchscreens. And there is a push in Europe to maybe bring them back. And it's coming from an unlikely place. Euro NCAP, which is kind of Europe's version of our National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or the NTSB, as well as it's more like, I guess, the IIHS, which is more of a private entity, not government related, but they still set safety standards, and they do so in Europe. And they have said that certain cars will get a better rating if key features are done with physical buttons. Yeah, physical buttons. Now, before, I've talked about a study where they compared how long it would take to achieve a certain number of tasks in a car. And they did that with the touchscreen, and they also did that with buttons, and it was significantly longer with the touchscreen. And the key factor, the kicker in this, was the fact that the one with buttons, the driver didn't even have to take their eyes off the road. So that wasn't even time that was spent with eyes off the road. You could just do it by feel. So buttons, as we know, are good. I think all of these touchscreens in cars are, I don't like them. A, I don't like how they look. B, when I'm driving, I don't like the light from these screens, especially at night. I know they dim at night. I know it's not as bad, but still, even then, I'm personally not a fan of all the screens in cars. Maybe the gauge cluster, but even then, yeah, it's not me. That's for sure. Now what Euro NCAP has done has basically, it's not a law in Europe, it's voluntary, but they're saying certain key features, and they're including key features like turn signals, hazard indicators, and things like that. They're not saying just climate control. They haven't really defined that as, other things like climate control, which really should be physical buttons or knobs. Again, it really, really should be. But they're saying that cars that do have these features that aren't, touchscreen, like why would you want your wipers? That's one of the ones they've mentioned, wipers, and for example, in a lot of Tesla vehicles, your wiper is controlled by the touchscreen. I don't know why you would want that. In fact, with the Teslas, I remember at Pikes Peak, not this last year, but the year before, it was rainy, it was cold, it was icy, it was terrible. And Randy Popst was driving, I believe it was the Unplugged Performance Tesla, and he couldn't actually turn the wipers on because he was wearing his racing gloves, and he couldn't get his glove off so that he could turn the wipers on in the touchscreen. I mean, that's a perfect illustration why things like wipers should not be touchscreen controlled. They absolutely shouldn't be, and Euro NCAP agrees they do. Now, will they add that to include things like climate control? I don't know. Probably not, but they should. They should, in my opinion. In fact, if anything, we should bring all of the controls back to buttons. I think buttons and knobs are truly the way to go. And when you think about it, too, I mean, sure, you can still have things controlled in a touchscreen. I mean, yeah, you can have that as a redundancy, but I think your key function should be button controlled. There should be no ifs, ands, or buts. And especially with touchscreens, I know why manufacturers do this, right? It's not just because touchscreens are cool, they're fancy, they're trendy right now. Everyone wants a touchscreen. Millennial buyers and Gen Z buyers want touchscreens because for some reason millennial and Gen Z buyers care more about the comfort of the car than how it actually drives or performs. But, that's neither here nor there. But that being the case, manufacturers doing this, integrating this into touchscreens, yes, the actual touchscreen itself is probably fairly expensive to manufacture, to develop it, to do all of that. But compared to the component cost of multiple buttons, which, by the way, buttons are cheap. Buttons are dirt cheap, but you got to do the wiring harness. It's got to go back there. It's got to go to different modules or whatever. And, from the assembly perspective and from the cost of manufacture, it makes sense why they're doing the touchscreens. Because honestly, it's probably cheaper. You've got one set of cables going to the touchscreen. That's it. You just got to put the screen on the dash. So, I get why they're doing it. I don't necessarily think it's a good thing. I think in a weird way, Euro NCAP is onto something here by saying safety, at least safety-related items, must be button controlled. And again, it's not a legal mandate, but they're saying if you want a top Euro NCAP score, you got to have physical buttons for these few things. And that'll probably trickle to some other markets. I mean, manufacturers don't want to make multiple versions of the same car, for different markets if they can help it. So, hey, anyway, you've been listening to the Automotive ADHD show. Thanks for joining me here on the show. Of course, you don't want to miss a minute of this show. Lots of great ways to catch it on the radio as well as online, YouTube and Rumble. The show's on video. And feel free to download the podcast. Go check it out and give it a rating on Spotify. I'll talk to you next week when we're talking more cars right here.